electricity goes into the SAPP, and of course, while the molecules will go with Europe, we knew that working with South Africa, but also other African nations, is extremely important, as Honorable Wendo had mentioned. And I think the next slide then really begins to get into the details of what that could look like. So on the next slide, I think we start talking about common using infrastructure. So where that renewable energy lies, it's in this area. It's called the Tsalkahed National Park. And no, it's not a national park full of forests and animals. It's actually a multi-use park where at the moment, I think the anchor economic activity there is diamond mining. So there's a lot of activity going on there, but at the same time, it also has some of these best solar and wind resources. And we're looking at developing multiple parks there, but importantly, we're looking at how do we connect those parks together using common user infrastructure, such as shared hydrogen pipelines, water pipelines, and transmission lines. And then the next slide actually then shows you how we envision building a hydrogen backbone with South Africa to make sure that we can take some of our green hydrogen molecules from Namibia all the way to some of the South African industrial clusters, such as there where you see the 57 million tons of carbon dioxide. That is Secunda. It is the single largest point of carbon dioxide emissions on the continent. And while we aspire to decarbonize the world, you cannot do that without, of course, decarbonizing Africa. South Africa is the largest source of carbon emissions. So this was where we had started from. Of course, some of our molecules can go down to Saldanha, where they want to have a green steel plant as well. And nothing stops us from putting some green steel plants in Namibia as well. But what you see here is Honorable Alwendo's vision beginning to be implemented, which is African countries beginning to work together to industrialize. I think the next slide then shows you that South Africa begins to now share that vision. This is Sasol's slides that they were presenting to their investors, and you can see they're saying, look, their pathway to carbon neutrality by 2050 is actually anchored by what they themselves called a catalytic project in Namibia. So of course that is what we're trying to do with Hyphen in southern part of Namibia. They have their own ambitions there in Bochubai, but what you can see is again Namibia and South Africa beginning to come closer and closer together in planning their multiple molecule productions in order to industrialize across the continent. I think the next slide then begins to take us to, here is now where I'd love for you to reminisce our initial squiggly line, the little port with an arrow to Europe. When you start to throw a bit more capital on it, you start coming to these sort of diagrams. This is an extract from a port master plan that was developed for the Port of Lüderitz in conjunction and in partnership with the Port of Rotterdam and indeed the Hyphen project. And this is what the Angra port facility will look like. We're looking here at a 500 million euro facility. But when you look at what we will be looking to trade on that particular facility, you can see it goes beyond ammonia. So those three darker green bays there under quay number 3, that is where we want to get out up to 18 million tons of liquid ammonia. But once you start coming down here on the legend, you can see that we're looking to facilitate the export of manganese, which is of course a South African product. We're looking to facilitate the potential export of lead and zinc concentrate. You can see that we're looking to add value towards zinc. And then of course, phosphate ore is something we might be able to develop at home, and so it goes on. And what you also see there is that we're planning, of course, other pieces of infrastructure, ports, rail, road, ammonia pipeline, phosphate ore slurry pipelines. This is the gross fixed capital formation that begins to come into Namibia because of hydrogen, and this is why we're doing hydrogen. We're not doing hydrogen for the molecule. We're doing hydrogen because these pieces of infrastructure will exist for many years and should be able to facilitate many different types of economic activity. So if we then start proceeding to the next slide, to achieve these goals, you have to do a lot of preparatory work. This is what Ed and others are doing around the world. We have to start measuring the wind there so we can get bankable data and raise the capital. So you can see in the first 2 white blocks, that is the block that Hyphen has, and those are their metmasts that they're going to be developing. In fact, the first one is already up. That's the picture on the right-hand side. But the government realizes that in order to engender an organized flurry of activity in that area where we can develop more than one project. We will have to accelerate that process ourselves, and so we are envisioning putting up about 20 met masts in that area and doing a strategic environmental assessment of that whole area so that we can better design where the next land parcel should be. And by the time we offer those to the market, they will already have some value. They'll be de-risked from an environmental perspective, but we would have spent 8 or 6 months already capturing some wind data, and that should shorten the development timelines for developers. So this is our activity that we need to kickstart as early as possible next year. And then the next slide really then begins to, I think, take you to what work we're doing on green industrialization. So we've started working with McKinsey to look at what possible industries could actually take part in Namibia, what industrial zones will they need to be built in, what tax incentives will need to be mobilized in order to host copper cable manufacturing. That will obviously essentially entail a very interesting conversation with Zambia, who has a lot of the copper in Africa. At the moment, we're actually just exporting their copper ingots pretty much on truck onto a ship. Could we put a facility in Namibia where we actually offtake some of their copper, produce some copper wire, and then of course we're going to use a lot of that in this very, very large renewable energy installation that will need the copper. Wind turbine manufacturing is one we're looking at. We've already started talking to Fortescue, for example, about an electrolyzer manufacturing plant. And our president and their principal have essentially given us a bit of a proverbial kick up the backside to say, look, get on with it, do it a lot quicker. And so a lot of us at the Green Hydrogen Council will be seized with this as soon as possible. Blue Economy, Kelp Blue just won the Zayed Sustainability Awards here. They're doing amazing work there. And then, of course, PVC production is something Mynupe and Mynupe are already talking to a few developers to put up a plant like that in Arandis. And so the list goes on. What you can see here is you also need to prioritize. So some of the green is what we think we could get going as soon as possible. Some of the blue, we will be sort of facilitating that conversation this coming year as well.